Hi, my name is Lizzie Chan, and I'm a member of the CPR Institute's Young Leaders and Alternative Dispute Resolution Steering Committee. I am delighted to host today's episode of the CPR Y-ADR Corporate Counsel interview series. The Y-ADR seeks to educate the next generation of leaders in the ADR field on the full spectrum of dispute resolution and prevention techniques, and to provide an insider's perspective on how CPR's community of in-house counsel, external counsel, and other experts in the field are using these techniques to manage conflict to enable purpose. As part of this goal, I'm speaking with corporate counsel and companies all around the world about their experiences with ADR and to ask them about their career advice for young practitioners in the ADR field. Today, I am delighted to welcome my good friend, Bryan Fok, who is in-house counsel at Asia Litigation and Regulatory Enforcement at Morgan Stanley, based in Hong Kong. Hi, Bryan. We are delighted to have you here today.
I'm very happy to join you today, Lizzie.
Well, my first question for you is, can you tell us a bit about your career experience, your role at Morgan Stanley, and the types of disputes that you're involved in?
Sure. So I'm a disputes lawyer by background. I was in private practice with a international firm specializing in international arbitration for 7 to 8 years, and until I moved in-house to join the Asia Litigation and Regulatory Enforcement team of Morgan Stanley here in Hong Kong last year. In terms of the my current role and the types of disputes that I'm involved in, given that Morgan Stanley is a large financial services company, and I cover all business divisions. So I support all business divisions whenever they have any contentious regulatory or litigation matters. So I think for me, regulatory matters make up most of the work that I handle right now, and that's just because of the business that we are in. So that's just an overview of my experience as well as my current role at Morgan Stanley.
I'd love to ask you about what your company does at the beginning of the disputes process when there might be a conflict. So what does your company do to try to avoid conflicts? And do you have a role in the pre-dispute settlement or attempt to settle conflict?
Yeah, I think we really emphasize the need to avoid conflict because obviously we are in a client relationship business, right? Whether it is institutional clients or private wealth clients, it is very important for our business colleagues to maintain good working relationships with the client. And as part of that, there obviously is a need to avoid conflict. So we always tell our business colleagues that whenever they see any sign of conflict or the client is raising issues or express that they are not satisfied with a particular transaction or a particular outcome, they will escalate to us. So we have very extensive procedures about complaints, how you handle complaints, and they need to escalate to legal and compliance. And that's why currently when I'm in the litigation team, I do see very early stage disputes because they're escalated to us. So I do have a role in very early stages of a dispute, and especially in pre-action settlement, because I'm involved like at a very early stage, and actually we have very few active proceedings.
I think dealing with disputes right at the outset of potential conflicts is really important. And one of the issues that I've discussed with some of our other interviewees in this process is the importance of the quality of the contract at the outset of a commercial relationship. And I wanted to ask you some questions about the factors that you consider when you're negotiating a dispute resolution clause. For example, what kinds of ADR tools do you like to use? Would you consider a multi-tiered approach, for example?
I think just going back to your point about having well-drafted contracts, I think that is very important, and that's why as a bank, an investment bank, we do have a lot of standard form contracts that we use on a daily basis, and they are like tried and tested throughout the years. So I think we have very solid and strong contracts to begin with, and that is the first step in mitigating any risks of a dispute, right? And in terms of the dispute settlement clause, I think our preference usually is to keep it simple. So we do not use multi-tiered clauses very often, and actually that would be the exception in my experience. But if our counterparty insists on having a multi-tiered clause, then that would have to be well drafted, right? For example, you need to specify, let's say if you want to have a negotiation or settlement period before a party can refer a matter to a dispute, then it has to be well defined. For example, the notification, which officer you need to send the notice to, who will be representing the party in the negotiation. So it has to be very well drafted, I think, in order to prevent any jurisdictional challenges later on.
You've mentioned already the importance of a well-drafted contract and a well-drafted dispute resolution clause to manage risks. But say a risk does eventuate and you have a dispute proceeding. So what do you look for when you're selecting external counsel to support you in managing those proceedings?
For us, I think we are in a fortunate position because we have some law firms who we have a very strong working relationship with, and they have been helping us as an institution for years or decades even. So they know us very well, they know our infrastructure and our internal procedures very well, and that makes it very easy for us to cooperate with them in any investigation or proceedings. So I think in terms of things that we consider when selecting external counsel, I think track record, the experience is most relevant. And then the second is as I said, the institutional knowledge of us as a client, because obviously we are a huge organization. So being able to understand our requirements, our needs, or our concerns is very important to us. And lastly, I think I would want to mention we do place a lot of emphasis on diversity, and actually our department has been monitoring the gender and ethnicity statistics of external counsels that we instruct. And I actually just ahead of this interview, I've looked up the numbers for Asia, because I'm, as you mentioned in the introduction, I'm in the Asia Litigation and Regulatory Enforcement team. And in Asia for this year so far, in terms of the gender, we have 50% male and 50% female. And these are the lead partners of the matters on which we've instructed external counsel. And in terms of the ethnicity, 70% of them are white and 30% non-white. So I think we are doing pretty well on the diversity front in terms of the lead partners on the matters that we have instructed external counsel.
I'm really pleased that you raised the issue of diversity in international arbitration, which is so important, including diversity in all its forms, gender, ethnicity, and otherwise. And in this context, I wanted to mention the ECHA Task Force report that came out last year, indicating that users of arbitration can take a real lead on diversity issues, because they're the ones who select counsel and they're the ones that select arbitrators. And I think it's wonderful to hear that Morgan Stanley is taking a leadership role in this regard by tracking the data and using the data to keep to ensure accountability in achieving gender diversity goals. My next question for you is specific to international arbitration. And here I wanted to mention to the audience, because they might not know, but we actually met each other as colleagues in international arbitration at Herbert Smith Freehills. My question for you is, What do you look for when you're designating an arbitrator?
When we are designating an arbitrator, I think, again, we look for arbitrators with a track record. And this is very important for us, both when we select counsel and select arbitrators, because the disputes that we are involved in are complex and high value. So we really do need, like, everyone in the process to be very experienced, and they have the expertise for that particular type of disputes, and they have a strong track record. So for both counsel and arbitrator, track record is something that we consider very carefully, and we place a lot of emphasis on that. I think for arbitrators, it is very important for arbitrators to remember that efficiency and cost both in terms of cost and time is very important to us as users of arbitration and the ultimate client, right? Because we do want to resolve disputes as quickly as possible, although we are mindful that the disputes that we are involved in are complex, but we do want the arbitrator to proceed and make progress as quickly as possible, so that we can put the dispute behind us, and then hopefully we can continue working with our clients, right, once we have the dispute behind us. So that is very important to us as an institution.
In the beginning of the interview, you mentioned that you've worked in private practice and recently moved to a financial institution. I was wondering if you could share your advice for young practitioners who want to move in-house.
I think if any young practitioners are interested in moving in-house, secondment is a great opportunity for young practitioners in private practice to get a taste or insight into what being an in-house counsel is like. It is very different from a law firm because you have different considerations, you have different priorities, and I can tell you it's quite different from being in private practice. For example, as I mentioned in the beginning, in private practice, I do mainly arbitration. So 80% of my work in private practice was in international arbitration. But right now, arbitration only makes up a tiny part of my work. So I need to learn a new area, which is financial services regulatory work, very quickly. And that makes it interesting, but it's also a challenge for me, shifting to an in-house role with a bank. But fortunately, when I was still with my previous firm, I had the opportunity to spend 9 months with another bank, and that really, I think, triggered my interest in moving to an in-house role in the financial sector. So I think my main advice for anyone interested in moving in-house is to try to get a secondment opportunity to a client or a commercial organization.
I think your emphasis on learning about many different forms of ADR is really important, and that's something I have discovered talking to corporate counsel and different companies, and just learning about the range of ADR tools, whether that's adjudication, arbitration, negotiation, settlement, or mediation, or something else. It's just so, like, having that range of skills is so important.
Yeah, and I would just add, in terms of the range of skills, as an in-house counsel, because you're involved in such an early stage, it's not just the dispute resolution methods that you need to think about. So, as you mentioned, gaining experience in the various types of dispute resolution methods, whether it is arbitration or litigation, but really is you need to think about risk in a broader sense, because our role is to help the company manage and mitigate risk. So that is our goal, right? So you need to think about risk in a much broader sense as compared to when you are in private practice.
I'm really glad you raised that, because one of CPR's key missions is to manage conflicts to enable purpose. So what we're really trying to advocate is for companies to think about how they can manage those risks so that they can focus on what they do best. which is, producing a product or providing certain services. My final question for you is a big one, and that is, what is your advice for young lawyers in the ADR field?
I think if I can only speak about international arbitration because that was the area in which I had the most experience when I was in private practice. I think it is very important for international arbitration lawyers to have a international outlook, and a good way to gain a international outlook is to spend time abroad, whether to study or to work in a foreign law firm. And for me, I think I also was fortunate to have done several overseas secondment when I was with my previous firms, and I've spent some time in Beijing, London, and I spent 1 year with a Swiss firm in Switzerland, in Geneva. I think that really opened my eyes to how things are done differently in different parts of the world, and I had more experience of working in cases that are not governed by common law. I have a common law background, having studied law in the UK and did my training in Hong Kong, but working in civil law jurisdictions again exposed me to the civil law way of thinking and how sometimes they would, especially the procedural aspects, they would approach things quite differently than common lawyers. And so I think that would be my main advice to lawyers interested in international arbitration.
You've had such a rich and varied career, and I know that the young practitioners watching this interview will really appreciate your insights. Thank you again for your time, Bryan, and thank you to our audience for tuning in.
Thanks, Lizzie.